The Judas Cradle was unlike many other instruments of torture because its cruelty was not confined to pain alone. It was engineered to degrade, to strip away dignity, to make the victim a spectacle, where the rack tore the body and the Iron Maiden entombed it. The Judas Cradle shamed it. Its design ensured that suffering was never private but public, layered with humiliation that could cut as deeply as its wooden pyramid. The device itself seemed deceptively simple. A tall wooden frame supporting a pyramid-shaped seat, sharpened to a point. The victim, stripped of clothing, was hoisted into the air by ropes and pulleys, then slowly lowered onto the apex of the pyramid. The point entered the most vulnerable parts of the body, often the anus or genitals, transforming the act into both torture and degradation. Unlike the clean stroke of an executioner's blade, the cradle prolonged agony in ways that mocked the very humanity of the victim. This naked exposure was part of its cruelty. Victims were not only in pain but displayed, their bodies made objects of ridicule in a society where honor, modesty, and reputation meant survival. This forced indecency compounded the suffering. Men were unmanned, women shamed, the human body weaponized against itself. The pyramid became a grotesque stage on which dignity was destroyed before an audience of guards, judges, or even crowds. The humiliation was deliberate. Torturers often bound the victim's hands behind their back, ensuring helplessness, while their weight slowly drove them downward. Sometimes the ropes were adjusted to increase or decrease the pressure, prolonging the ordeal as onlookers jeered. The more the victim writhed, the deeper the pyramid cut, turning the body's instinctive struggle for relief into a tool of its own destruction. Pain was inseparable from embarrassment. The victim's cries were drowned in the laughter of those who watched. Historical accounts suggest that the Judas Cradle was used not only for punishment but for intimidation. By breaking the victim's dignity, the authorities sent a message to all who witnessed it. The state or church could reduce any man or woman to this. The sight of a respected citizen forced onto the cradle was a lesson more powerful than any sermon. It was not enough to kill or wound. The goal was to erase pride, to turn defiance into humiliation, to remind communities that rebellion ended not in martyrdom, but in disgrace. The psychological torment was immense. To be stripped and exposed in public was already degrading. To be impaled slowly, in the most intimate parts of the body, added a layer of shame that lingered long after death or release. Survivors, if any, bore not only scars of flesh but scars of reputation. In societies where honor was tied to family and legacy, such humiliation spread beyond the victim, tainting their name for generations. The Judas Cradle thus blurred the line between torture and theater. It was not designed merely to extract confessions or punish crimes, but to perform power. Its cruelty lay as much in the audience as in the device itself. Guards who laughed, priests who sanctioned, rulers who ordered, all participated in turning one person's agony into a demonstration of authority. The victim's suffering became a story retold in whispers, magnifying fear across communities long after the pyramid had been cleaned for its next use. In this way, the Judas Cradle was not just a physical weapon, but a cultural one. It struck at the foundations of human dignity, reminding people that the body could be turned into an instrument of its own disgrace. The pain was terrible, but the humiliation was worse, for it outlasted the moment, embedding itself in memory and reputation. More than most devices of its time, the cradle revealed how torture was designed not only to hurt, but to dehumanize, to reduce a person to less than human before the eyes of others. The Judas Cradle was disturbing, not simply because of the wounds it inflicted, but because of what it revealed about power. It showed that authority sought not just obedience but domination of the soul. It taught that the worst fate was not death, but dishonor. And in that, the device became more than wood and rope. It became a stage for humiliation, where pain and shame fused into one of history's most disturbing spectacles. The Judas Cradle was not a device of quick endings. Unlike the axe that fell in a single stroke or the gallows that snapped a neck in seconds, this instrument was designed for slowness. Its cruelty lay in precision. Every rope, every pulley, every inch of descent calculated to stretch suffering into hours, even days. Death was not the goal. Endurance was. The victim's own weight became the mechanism of torment, dragging them deeper onto the pyramid point. With every breath, every twitch, every futile attempt to resist, the structure of the device revealed its purpose. A tall frame supported the pyramid, its sides polished from repeated use, its apex sharpened just enough to pierce flesh without killing outright. Victims were suspended by ropes tied to their wrists, ankles, or torso. These ropes were not meant to restrain alone. They were the torturer's levers, allowing him to control descent with brutal care. A single twist of the pulley could lower the body an inch, sometimes less, pressing the pyramid deeper into the most vulnerable parts of the victim's anatomy. The descent was never rushed. Torturers prided themselves on their ability to prolong agony. Lower the body too quickly, and the victim might pass out from shock or bleed too swiftly. Lower it too slowly, and the effect diminished. The art lay in balancing these extremes, ensuring that the victim remained conscious, screaming, and fully aware of each stage of penetration. The pyramid did not pierce organs in one motion, but threatened them gradually, turning anticipation into agony as victims wondered which movement would bring the next rupture. The victim's own body conspired in the torment. The cradle forced them into a posture of vulnerability, straddling the point with no way to relieve pressure. Muscles trembled, weight shifted, and every attempt at escape drove the pyramid deeper. Struggle became punishment. Stillness became punishment. There was no relief. The more the victim resisted, the more the ropes allowed torturers to pull them back down, turning desperation into spectacle. Hars became the true measure of suffering. Accounts suggest that some victims remained on the cradle for entire nights, suspended just enough to prevent immediate impalement, then released inch by inch until exhaustion made them collapse onto the pyramid. This slow rhythm, lower pause, was a symphony of precision cruelty. The victim knew what awaited but could not hasten or delay it. Time itself became the torturer, stretching agony across every heartbeat. Such slowness was not merely physical torment. It was psychological disintegration. Anticipation is its own form of pain, and the cradle exploited this mercilessly. Victims were forced to wait between descents, every pause filled with dread of the next motion. The silence of the chamber magnified the ticking of time, the creak of ropes, the faint groan of wood. Each sound marked another stage in a journey downward that had no escape but collapse. Torturers often used this precision to extract confessions. They could halt the descent at any moment, demand answers, then resume when defiance persisted. The device was not simply punishment. It was interrogation, calibrated to turn resistance into compliance. A man might resist the rack, enduring broken joints, but the cradle offered no such defiance. To be impaled slowly, humiliated and helpless, was to face a torment that dissolved courage inch by inch. Even for those who survived initial sessions, the damage was immense. Internal injuries lingered, infections festered, and chronic pain haunted them long after release. But the deeper wound was psychological. Survivors spoke of living in constant fear of slow descent, haunted by the memory of ropes tightening above them, the pyramid waiting below. The cradle made time itself an enemy, teaching them that suffering could stretch endlessly without resolution. This was the genius and the horror of the Judas Cradle. It demonstrated how torture need not rely on frenzy or chaos. Its cruelty lay in control, in the deliberate, calculated pace that transformed minutes into eternities. It turned the victim's own body into an executioner, their weight pulling them deeper with every breath. Death was not its immediate aim, despair was. And in that precision, the cradle proved more disturbing than most devices of its age. The Judas Cradle was designed to wound, but its cruelty did not end with the pyramid's sharp point. In many cases, the device was deliberately kept filthy, its surfaces caked with the blood, sweat, and excrement of previous victims. Unlike the tools of a surgeon, it was never cleaned between uses. This neglect, or rather this intention, ensured that the torment did not conclude when the victim was lifted from the pyramid. Instead, it lingered, festering inside their body as infection, turning the cradle into a sentence of disease and decay as much as of pain. The pyramid's design made this almost inevitable. Victims were lowered onto the apex through the anus or genitals, places highly vulnerable to tearing and contamination. Even if the descent was controlled to prevent immediate death, the wounds created were deep enough to open pathways for filth. Bacteria entered quickly. In an age without antiseptics or antibiotics, such infections were a near certain death sentence. What began as piercing pain in the dungeon became fever, swelling, and slow decline days later. Some accounts suggest that torturers even smeared the pyramid with substances meant to intensify this process. Feces, rancid oils, or the blood of earlier victims. Whether exaggerated or not, the image alone captures the calculated malice behind the device. Death did not need to come in the chamber itself. It could arrive days later, when the victim's wounds festered, when the infection spread through the bloodstream, when the body, already broken in spirit, collapsed under invisible invaders. For prisoners, this knowledge deepened the terror. Even if one survived the immediate ordeal, survival was poisoned by dread of what might come next. Every ache, every shiver of fever became a reminder that the pyramid's cruelty continued long after the ropes were untied. The Judas Cradle thus extended its reach beyond the moment of torture, haunting victims with the possibility of slow, rotting death. In many ways, this aspect made the device even more disturbing than instruments like the rack. The rack crippled instantly, dislocating joints and tearing muscles, but its damage was visible and immediate. The cradle inflicted wounds that looked survivable, even minor at first glance, yet concealed deeper destruction. Victims might leave the chamber walking, only to collapse days later as infection overtook them. This false hope, followed by lingering decline, was itself another form of torment. Communities understood this as well. The sight of someone who had endured the cradle was not reassuring. Survivors carried festering wounds, smelled of decay, and often died in agony days after their release. These lingering deaths became part of the legend, retold as proof that no one truly escaped the device. Even when it did not kill immediately, it poisoned the future, turning life into a drawn-out punishment. What is chilling is that this was not an accident. The lack of cleaning was deliberate, a feature rather than a flaw. Authorities wanted the device to carry not only immediate pain, but lasting consequence. It was not enough to terrify in the moment. The Judas Cradle had to echo into the days and weeks that followed. Infections became invisible extensions of the torturer's hand, pursuing the victim beyond the chamber walls, ensuring that the cradle's influence outlived the session. For those who studied the art of cruelty, this made the device especially effective. It demonstrated that power could stretch beyond physical presence. The torturer did not need to swing a whip daily. The pyramid itself carried the punishment forward, delivering suffering long after the victim had left the dungeon. Authority thus magnified itself, showing that obedience was not only demanded under threat of immediate torment, but under the shadow of lingering ruin. In this way, infection became part of the design. The Judas Cradle was not simply about the agony of the moment, but about corruption that spread within the body, unseen yet unstoppable. It revealed the terrifying ingenuity of medieval torture, that suffering could be prolonged not only by rope and wood, but by biology itself. Pain ended when the victim passed out. Infection ensured it returned again and again, until the body finally surrendered. The cradle's spikes and pyramid were horrifying enough, but its filth turned it into something worse, a weapon of disease, a machine of decay. And in this, it proved itself not only a tool of torture, but a sentence of lingering death, disturbing in ways that stretched far beyond the dungeon walls. The Judas Cradle was never just about punishing a single victim. It was about sending a message. In a world where authority was fragile and rebellion simmered beneath the surface, rulers and inquisitors needed tools that could frighten entire populations into obedience. The cradle became one such tool, not only a device of torment, but a spectacle of control. Its disturbing design served as both punishment for the condemned and a warning for everyone who witnessed it. Medieval justice was built on fear. Executions were public. Torture, often performed before crowds. The aim was not merely to punish the guilty, but to remind the innocent of the cost of defiance. The Judas Cradle, with its grotesque pyramid point and humiliating posture, fit perfectly into this theater of authority. To see a man or woman stripped, bound, and lowered onto the device was to see power made flesh. Power that could invade the most private parts of the body and turn them into instruments of pain. For inquisitors, it was a way to silence heresy. Faith was not only about belief, but about conformity, and nothing erased defiance faster than the image of a heretic impaled slowly before the eyes of others. The rack might break bones, but the cradle broke reputations. It was a punishment designed to disgrace, to strip away the victim's dignity so completely that no one would dare emulate them. In this sense, it was not simply torture, it was propaganda. Rulers used it similarly in times of unrest, when peasants rioted, when conspiracies threatened the crown, when whispers of rebellion spread, the cradle's legend was invoked. The device did not need to be used on hundreds, 1 or 2 victims were enough. Word spread quickly of their suffering, exaggerated with each telling. Soon entire communities fell silent, their anger drowned in the fear of the pyramid. The cradle's influence extended far beyond the dungeon, controlling villages and cities through rumor alone. What made it particularly effective was its combination of physical pain and humiliation. Execution could create martyrs, figures who died proudly, defying authority even as flames consumed them. The Judas Cradle offered no such dignity, to be displayed half-naked, squirming helplessly on the pyramid, robbed victims of any heroic image. They became objects of pity or ridicule, not admiration. This denied rebels the legacy they might have hoped for. It showed the community not noble resistance, but broken humiliation. The slow, lingering nature of the torture reinforced the message. A quick death could be braved, a drawn-out torment could not. Watching someone endure the cradle was to watch courage unravel, inch by inch, until screams replaced defiance. This spectacle of degradation taught onlookers that resistance ended not in glory, but in shame. And shame was contagious. It spread to families, to communities, to anyone associated with the condemned. The cradle thus controlled not only individuals but entire networks of people, tightening authorities' grip. Even the rumors of infection added to its control. Communities learned that those who endured the cradle often died days later, their bodies wasting away in fever and rot. This lingering death created an aura of inevitability. Once chosen for the pyramid, escape was impossible. The device thus came to symbolize finality, making resistance seem hopeless before it even began. Better to obey than to risk a fate, both painful and disgraceful. The cradle also reflected the values of its age. In a society obsessed with order, shame was as powerful a weapon as death. The device struck at both, fusing pain with dishonor. To submit to it was to lose one's body, one's dignity, one's legacy. That loss made obedience the only rational choice for those who witnessed it. Authority did not need to argue its case. The pyramid argued for it wordlessly and brutally. In this way, the Judas Cradle was more than a torture device. It was a tool of governance, a silent partner in the maintenance of order. It showed how authority could transform cruelty into policy, how suffering could be staged, not only to punish but to control. And in its disturbing design, it revealed the dark truth of power, that fear, once implanted, could govern more effectively than swords or laws. The Judas Cradle sits at the edge of history, half fact, half legend. Some scholars argue it was widely used across Europe, while others suggest its image was exaggerated by chroniclers eager to dramatize the cruelty of inquisitors and kings. Yet whether it was employed frequently or sparingly, whether its details were precise or embroidered by rumor, the effect was the same. The Judas Cradle became real in memory. Its terror lived not only in wood and rope, but in stories that spread farther than the device itself ever could. Descriptions of the cradle appeared in the writings of later centuries, often with lurid detail. Victims stripped and lowered slowly onto the pyramid, infections festering afterward, days of torment stretching into slow death. Were these accounts literal records, or were they retellings shaped by imagination? The truth is difficult to separate. Medieval chroniclers were as much storytellers as historians, and tales of punishment often grew darker with every retelling. Yet the consistency of the descriptions, the pyramid point, the ropes, the humiliation, suggests that some version of the device did exist, even if not exactly as legend describes. This blending of fact and myth was part of its power. Communities did not need to know whether every detail was true. They needed only to believe that it could be. Rumor gave the cradle a supernatural quality, making it more terrifying than proof alone could. Prisoners awaiting interrogation feared it not because they had seen it with their own eyes, but because they had heard whispers of what it could do. Fear does not require certainty. It thrives on uncertainty, and in that uncertainty, the Judas Cradle found immortality. Legends of the cradle also drew credibility from the reality of other tortures. People had witnessed the rack, the stake, the breaking wheel, the cage. They had seen men torn apart, women burned alive, rebels hanged in chains. Against this backdrop, the idea of a pyramid-shaped seat designed to impale slowly did not seem far-fetched. It was simply another step in a progression of cruelty that people already knew to be real. In this way, legend and history reinforce one another, each making the other more believable. Over time, the Judas Cradle became a symbol as much as a device. It represented the ingenuity of cruelty, the merging of pain with humiliation, the way authority could degrade as well as destroy. Even if it was rarely used in practice, it was used constantly in imagination. Chroniclers, artists, and storytellers ensured that its image endured, each depiction more vivid than the last. By the time it appeared in later writings and museum displays, it had become inseparable from the idea of medieval torture itself. For victims, this blurring of legend and reality added another layer of torment. To be threatened with the cradle was to face not only the device, but the entire weight of its legend. Prisoners imagined every horror they had heard, every infection, every humiliation. In many cases, the fear of what might happen broke them long before the pyramid touched their flesh. The legend was as effective as the wood and iron. Today, historians continue to debate the extent of the cradle's use. Some argue it was a later invention misattributed to the Middle Ages. Others maintain that versions of it existed, adapted from earlier punishment devices. But whether artifact or exaggeration, its place in cultural memory is undeniable. The cradle has come to embody the disturbing creativity of medieval punishment, a symbol that speaks less to exact fact than to the psychological truth of fear. And perhaps that is the final horror, that cruelty does not need certainty to endure. The Judas Cradle may have been rare, but its legend was everywhere. It lived in whispers, in rumors, in the fearful glances of those who wondered if they might one day feel its point. It became a reality, not because it was used often, but because it was believed in. And belief, as history shows, can wound as deeply as any blade.